on Dialogue Weekend. 3 people, including a Chinese PhD student, were killed in a series of shootings in and around Chicago.
It's hard to believe, right? I mean, on rare occasions, luckily rare occasions, a student at the University of Chicago gets harmed or sometimes shot. Most of the time it's somebody that you don't know, so it's distant, right? And this one really hit home.
US President Donald Trump has been impeached again after the Capitol Hill riots. And this week's newsmaker. Now, on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. As a promising scholar and a friend, the 30-year-old doctoral Chinese student Fan Yiran was remembered by the University of Chicago community during Thursday's candlelight vigil. Fan was one of the 3 victims killed in a random shooting spree last Saturday in and around Chicago. How should Chinese students deal with the prevalence of guns in the time of pandemic crisis? Will students and their parents reconsider their plans to study in the U.S.? To talk more about this, we are joined in the studio by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and via satellite by Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University, as well as via Skype by Harvey Zodan, Senior Fellow at Center for China and Globalization. So John, I will start with you here. I mean, we know gun violence in the U.S. is not rare, let's say, but here is the Chinese students, one of the best, let's say. He had his bachelor's degree in Peking University, master's degree in Oxford, Cambridge, and then in Chicago University, all the best and the brightest. But you see this senseless killing, loss of a brilliant life. What's your first response to this?
It's very unfortunate. First of all, we extend our condolence to the family of this very brilliant young man. But this goes to the very root of the gun violence problem in the United States. And I think this is a hopeless cause. There are people in the United States trying to initiate or start or launch the gun control campaign, but I think it's the Second Amendment right in the United States is just upheld so many places by so many people that's very difficult to change that. Even with today's political landscape, I don't think that the control law can move any further. And with guns, there will be people like him, the killer, right, who is obviously, I think, appears to have a criminal record. Which shouldn't allow him to have the gun in the first place. And also, I think is mentally demented in a way. So when these people have access to a gun, those things, these tragedies are bound to happen. It just happens that this time it's a very brilliant Chinese student. It's very sad. It's very sad.
Yeah, Harvey, this shooter, 32-year-old, according to local reports, he wrote something before the killing on his Facebook page, basically to express the intention to hurt people or to even blow up his entire community. It seems like this is a troubled person too here.
Yeah, absolutely. The system is broken. And I hate to be corny in mixed metaphors, but this Nightingale, the shooter, was the canary in the gold mine. Because why? He fits Trump supporters' demographics, a low-income, low-educated, aggrieved male who mirrors the kooks who tried to bring down the U.S. government and mirrors Trump in some respects as well. So it's ironic that this group has blood on their hands. And it's interesting to me, too, that yesterday the NRA, the National Rifle Association, declared bankruptcy and moved to Texas so they could avoid liability for the many bad things that they've done. So the system is broken, and I think John is absolutely right that it's going to be impossible to fix. There's 330 million Americans, and there's more guns than that. So a gun for every man, woman, and child in America. It's a national disgrace and tragedy.
Professor Mahoney, if you look at the district, look at the school campus area of Chicago University, Is there anything the school can do or the local district can do to help improve the safety probably, to protect the students, the local residents over there?
Well, in the United States, we have, particularly in the cities, we have urban campuses. We have areas that you have a lot of flow through. You have people who live on and off campus. Generally, graduate students, PhD students don't live on campus. They move around through the city. And Chicago, in particular, has been very hard hit in the past year. Chicago's been struggling for many years with crime and with high murder rates. And we've seen this surge in particular over the past year. And we've seen a breakdown in policing. We've seen a breakdown in mental health. We've seen a breakdown in a lot of things. And I agree with what the other people have said, that we don't see an institutional capacity to respond to this problem. In fact, when Biden was elected, we saw once again a surge in gun sales, a surge in bullet sales. But I think that the challenge for institutions like the University of Chicago or other urban universities is far beyond their scope. It's really difficult for them to take responsibility for what are society-wide systemic problems.
Agree with you probably. If you look at the figure in the Chicago area, the year 2020, basically from January to November, the figure is like 3,800 people were shot in Chicago. Not in entire 2020. I mean, that's represent an increase of 58% of the incidents over there. Does that have anything to do with, say, the pandemic? Maybe more people somehow getting out of jobs, more poverty over there, and then it contributes more gun ownership or more violence, Professor Mahoney?
I think that this is what a lot of people are believing. We're just starting to digest the numbers and trying to figure out what are the real causes. My suspicion is that COVID, poverty, these have been destabilizing. There's almost an apocalyptic mentality on the left and the right in this country. We've seen a surge in mental health problems associated not only with the political instability, but also COVID and the economic problems that have come out of this. We're already struggling with social justice and policing and violence. So I think all of these things have intersected in ways likely that have produced the surges in violence in areas that were already most vulnerable to it, like Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Harvey, I want you to talk more about for our viewers, like who is probably out of the United States. So you talk about NRA, who is NRA, and also you talked about, it's almost hopeless. I know, like President Obama, in his term, he tried many times, to push very hard for gun control, but of course, almost to no avail over there.
Now, the National Rifle Association started off as a gun safety organization, but during the years of America becoming more conservative, starting in the 70s, it turned into a guns right organization. And it really is responsible for all the tragedies, or many of the tragedies that occurred in America, the shootings in schools and on campuses and so on, because they're the premier lobby, and they're so well organized that they're able to scare legislators, governors, congresspeople, and others into submission, because they do a report on every legislator, and they're very active. And everybody's now talking about being primaried by President Trump or his supporters. Well, he didn't invent this phenomenon. The NRA has been practicing this for decades now. So if you cross the NRA, it's a big problem. But there have been some cracks in their armor, and that's why the NRA declared bankruptcy, moved to Texas, why there are significant groups out there, started like by former Congresswoman Giffords in Texas, who was shot herself, by the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, who's giving hundreds of millions of dollars in this cause. So maybe in the future there'll be a reckoning, but it's not around the corner by any means.
Well, John, if you look at the Chinese students, and in particular their parents, kids are in the States, or for the parents who are planning to send their kids overseas for further study. For example, the U.S. Is a primary choice for a lot of Chinese families. 2019, I think it's like 370,000 Chinese students, one-third of the international students in the U.S. But we know last year, the pandemic, and President Trump and his administration, he used the word like Chinese virus, and his officials basically saying, oh, every Chinese could be a spy. There's already enough pressure on the Chinese scholars. And then you have pandemic, and then now you have violence.
It's a big concern. The United States attracts a lot of Chinese students. As a matter of fact, I think the Chinese students represents probably the largest percentage in terms of students population. One-third of the foreign students in the United States. It's actually very important for many smaller colleges, liberal arts college, I think in the South, for example. A lot of them rely on this income source. Now, with this, the reasons you have mentioned on top of this, I think there's going to be impact. I'm pretty sure over time, the applications for admission sent from China will be reduced in the future. But also, I want to make a point though, even though it looks pretty bad to the Chinese students here in China, I think overall, in the United States, many universities are still very safe. I mean, it's an isolated case. We only have a handful of universities that have this kind of urban campuses neighboring quite bad neighborhoods. University of Chicago is one example. Johns Hopkins is another famous example. I used to attend a university in New Jersey called NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. My company, the lab, Bell Lab, sent me over there for night studies. It wasn't a safe place at all. It was in downtown Newark. But overall, there are only a few places like that. So we shouldn't let this whitewash all the university campus situation in the United States. I think overwhelming majority are quite safe. They're away from urban centers. So I think that has to be taken into perspective.
Okay, nice point over there. But I have another question for Professor Mahoney. If you look at the Capitol Hill, the riot over there, and now there's a warning, on January 20th, inauguration, probably more violence is expected nationwide, basically. And then if you look at beyond that, for the next 4 years of the Biden administration, given this divisiveness in the society and the politics, so people are expecting a more volatile state in the whole country. That may contribute a sense of uncertainty for a lot of people outside of the country.
Well, I think that's the case, and if we're still talking about prospects for Chinese students, it's a tremendous investment of time, of money. You have to look at what is the political risk. We find a lot of students who are Chinese students who are basically trapped in the United States right now. They're unable to travel. They can't afford to leave because they might not be able to get back in. They need to finish their studies. They've got too much invested. Mr. Fan, who was set to defend, I think, later this term, certainly wasn't in a position to leave at this point. He had so much invested. So, I think that what we're seeing is that in the next several years, we have whether or not the United States is going to get COVID under control, whether or not it's going to get the social division, the animosity, the political division. And to be honest with you, there are certain states that take, certain states that are so-called red states that take a much more of a hostile position in their state legislatures, that are passing laws that are, forcing state universities to cut ties with Chinese institutions, with Confucius Institute. We see this in certain states, and we also see that even in areas that are not so urban and perhaps not so dangerous, you run the risk of again, running into red state culture, Trump supporters who might have a more hostile view towards Chinese students. I hope that we continue to see a large amount of cultural exchange. I think it's vital for mutual understanding and mutual security. But I think the Chinese student has to be very, very savvy and very, very careful in making those sorts of decisions and look at the long term and the prospects and specific locations.
Yes, let's continue our discussion. 1 week after President Donald Trump's supporters violently stormed the U.S. Capitol building, the House of Representatives voted for the president to be impeached on the charge of incitement. So what comes next in Trump's second impeachment? How will it complicate the early days of Biden's presidency? Let's continue. Harvey, here, what's next? Impeachment already voted in the House. And, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says he will, put forward the impeachment to the trial, to the Senate. But Mitch McConnell, the leader over there, said that, no trial will be open until inauguration. Do we have any idea, when will the trial begin?
I think these things are still being worked out. Theoretically, actually, they can start an hour after Biden is sworn in. And so I think what is possible, not necessarily desirable, is that if there is a trial, that the Senate can be on two tracks. One track is the trial, the other track is its usual business, confirming members of the cabinet and dealing with other legislation. But the problem with this is that Biden needs to hit the ground running. And if it's still all Trump all the time, like it's been the last 5 years, counting the campaigns, even having a part-time trial will take away focus. I'd love to throw the book at Trump, but he's going to be up to his eyeballs anyway in litigation, even if he tries to pardon himself, which is a dubious legality. So because Trump still has exposure on the state and local level, and if Trump were tried and convicted in the Senate as well, it'll make him a martyr to his mob. So unfortunately, although I'd like to hang him, I think it's better not to have the trial and to get on with the country's business. I mean, Biden has to not only do so much, he has to undo so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, do you agree? Or
Yeah, I think the purpose of impeachment twice is to prevent him from coming back again in 2024. But even without that, I think it's quite difficult for him to come back in 2024 anyway. You don't have to do this sort of in a legal way, because it can be done politically. And besides, there's also some dispute or controversy over whether the Senate is entitled to impeach him once he's already left office, right? It looks like Mitch McConnell said that he's not going to do this before 20th of January, so it have to be done. If it's going to be done, it's going to be after 20th. Some legal scholars have been saying that the Constitution is very clear that you can only impeach a incumbent president. He's no longer incumbent president, so there's no ground for impeachment. But there are other scholars have been saying that there are precedents of censuring, not impeaching, right? Former senators. So there's an analogy can be made in this case. So I think this is a controversial case. These legal matters have to be worked out. Maybe even go to the Supreme Court. I don't think that this impeachment case will have a very friendly audience in the Supreme Court, given the three judges he has just appointed. Yes,
yeah.
The conservative judges sitting on the Supreme Court. So I think I sort of agree with Harvey's point that at this point an impeachment is really a moot point. It can be done politically. It has to be done in sort of in a strictly legal sense, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mahoney, if there is an impeachment trial in the Senate, obviously there's a kind of like a division within the Republican Party. But do you think Trump will be convicted?
That's really hard to say. My general sense is that he would not be. I don't see upwards of the 16 Republican senators who would need to break ranks. I don't think we'll reach that threshold. It's clear that a number of Republican senators are opposed to him and ready to vote against him. But I don't think that we're going to reach 16. And I agree with what the others have said. I think that the trial, whether or not it can proceed, whether or not it should proceed, I think it is reaching kind of a moot point. But above all, I think we're kind of reaching another interesting point, which is there will be tremendous incentives for Joe Biden to pardon Trump, and whether or not he can pardon Trump for an impeachable offense. I mean, we get into sort of constitutional issues, separation of powers, but Biden will want to put this to rest. He'll want to protect the power of the presidency for himself, and I think to avoid the distraction. And again, all Trump all the time. So it's going to be, I think, a very strange set of circumstances that are going to have to sort of work their way out in the middle of trying to solve the existential problems we face vis-a-vis COVID and economic crises.
Mm-hmm. Well, Harvey, Professor Mahoney mentioned about the priority really of the next administration. That is to deal with the COVID-19 and also economic recovery. And the President-elect Biden already proposed 1.9 trillion US dollars rescue plan, basically. So that probably make the case even less likely for the impeachment trial of Trump.
I think that the country needs to focus like a laser, right, to do what needs to be done, both to undo the damage that's been done the last 4 years by a very dysfunctional and divisive president. And at the same time, it's not only a political division. During this time in America, the rich, the 1%, have gotten much richer and profited from COVID, whereas most of the people, including the very poor, are suffering because the economy is on life support. As a consequence, we really need to work on trying to, get the vaccine out quickly, which is not getting out quickly, and also to take this economy that's on a coma and somehow get it going again, because it's not going to happen overnight. And you compare it with China, that's doing so well economically. America's got a really steep climb.
Well, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. So, John, the permanent ban of Trump on Twitter, as well as basically the rest of the social media over there, it's controversial. It's even draw the attention of the European leaders, including German Chancellor Merkel over there. She expressed the skeptics about the decision. Do you think probably too much power is given to the big tech here?
Well, this is an issue of how to classify these companies, whether they are publishers or whether they are what they call forums. In the case of forums, they are immune to certain liabilities, but they can't censor people, basically, right? Mm-hmm. They should allow people to speak. Whereas if you're in a publisher position, you have the editorial right to edit things, but you don't get the immunity to certain things. So I think this is going to be a very difficult issue. It has to be resolved eventually in the court. I think there are a couple of lawsuits going on right now. But I think aside from this, whether these companies are publishers or public forums, the issue is I think the more of a relevant problem, the relevant issue is whether President Trump's statements, remarks, speech really crossed the line. Okay. If he is inciting insurrection, if he's inciting riot, it doesn't matter if the company is a forum or publisher. Just delete it. Mm-hmm. We should shut it up. I mean, as any decent corporate citizen, you should do something like this. So I think this really boils down to the qualification, the characterization of that speech. I think clearly in this case, he crossed the line.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor Mahoney. Not to defend the big tech, but if there's something bad happened, we often blame the big tech for not doing enough. But here is Trump, the president. So everybody is concerned about, the big tech is having too much power in censoring the president. What's your opinion over there?
Well, it's really two sides of the same coin. You know, Trump abused social media, and he rode social media into the presidency and governed and one might say misgoverned through social media, and to some extent social media was complicit in that. And now social media, at a time when Trump began to turn against them, began to talk about building his own social media, began to talk about regulation, but was also facing the loss of power. Social media has censored him, and in part we can say responsibly, but I don't think anyone here on the left or the right feels particularly happy about this development, either the capacity and power of these big media companies to manipulate and control what gets said, what people think and believe, or to shut it off. So I think a reckoning is coming. It's long overdue, but it's going to be very difficult. Just as we're struggling to deal with guns and the Second Amendment issues, we also have here the fetishization of a principle with the First Amendment freedom of speech, and we're really kind of stuck and don't know how to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Now you live in Vienna. You know, European countries are concerned about the decision by Twitter and other big tech over there. I think another concern is like, you know, for countries like European countries, on one hand you have the big tech, basically they're US companies. On the other hand, you have European governments. If there's something like a contradictory, who will make the decision to delete or not to delete a certain person or certain post over there?
I think it's a very complicated issue. When I was the vice president of ABC TV, it was very easy to censor because, and I was a censor, because the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. It doesn't say that big tech or anybody else can't do that. So I believe that it's become so complicated that we have to do a better study of it. And is the case often in new technology, whether it's freedom of speech or cloning, the technology gets ahead of the morality. And so I think that this really has to be handled carefully and in great detail. And I think the leaders in Europe should be obviously concerned about the loss of their microphones and their bully pulpits like Angela Merkel. But the chancellor of all people should remember, as she usually does, her country's history of the big lie and all the things that went with it. It's kind of ironic in a way.
John, well, probably, you know, for the foreign government in particular, if they also rely on like the platform like Twitter, like Facebook, see, there's a case. The government would ask Facebook or Twitter, you need to delete this specific post or to ban this particular person, and then the big tech would say, no, I want to protect his or her freedom of speech. What will you do?
Well, any company should abide by the laws and regulations in a foreign country. I think in this case, what Chancellor Merkel has done, in my opinion, is kind of a cheap shot. She understands that these are all American companies. Right? The European sides are not very happy with them anyway. In the first place, they're initiating all kinds of antitrust investigations against these companies, and they pick up this example. But I totally disagree with her. I think in this case, it's a very clear example that this crossed the line.
Thank you all. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on the YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo. Thanks for watching. See you next week.